And we begin. Jack Mendelssohn's words. Here in this sanctuary of ancient dreams and wisdom and beauty, we come to grow, to be healed, to stretch mind and heart, to be challenged, renewed, to be helped in our own continuing struggles for meaning and for love, to help build a world with more justice and mercy in it, to be counted among the hopers and the doers. In the face of cynicism, darkness, brutality around us and within, we seek to align ourselves with a living community that would affirm rather than despair, that would think and act rather than simply adjust and succumb. Here we invite the spirit of our own humanity and the healing powers under, around, through, and beyond it to give us the nerve and grace, the toughness and sensitivity to search out the truth that frees and the life that maketh all things new. And you can guess what our opening hymn is. O life that maketh all things new. Our hymn is number 12. join in the words of our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor, y ayudarnos los unos a los otros. So be it. Good morning. And this is one of our annual Spirit of Democracy services, and so I must say, tell me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. You're good. We are going to be welcoming our guest speaker this morning, Neera Tanden, and Neera will be introduced by our affiliate community minister, Bill Schulz. And, you know, there's enough going on this morning that you don't need me blathering on and on with a lot of announcements. So we'll see how things go at the very tail end of the service, and if there is a need for some announcements at that point, we'll do them then. But what I would like to do right now is to ask Neera to just come stand with me here. And you're so delighted, I'm sure, to see a picture of yourself at age 7 years old in the picture directory of this congregation. There's one when Bill was the minister here, and there's also a picture when Jack Mendelson was the minister here. And, you know, even better than the picture of you is the picture of this very bushy-looking fellow, Bill Schulz. Bill Schulz in the late 70s was very, very bushy-looking, and you're going to want to pass these around. Neera grew up in this congregation, and have you been in this room since you were married in this room?
Only once, just to show my kids. Just to look around.
Right. And I want to introduce Neera to our kids before they go on to their classes. And I just thought that here you are a policy advisor, and you have worked with senators and presidents and advised in any number of ways, and lead a leading think tank in Washington, D.C. that is completely engaged in social change issues. Were there any experiences that you had growing up that led you to the career, the vocation, the calling that you have today?
Yes. I actually feel like my experiences in Bedford, particularly when I was very young, have driven everything else in my life. And I want to say, most importantly, that this congregation was really there for my family when we were going through incredible struggles. So I was born in Bedford, Massachusetts. My parents were Indian immigrants. Both my parents came here to this church. And then when I was 5, my father left. And my mother, Neera Tanden, had never worked a day in her life, was an Indian immigrant, had only been here several years, and she was definitely lost and faced a real question whether she should go back to India with her 2 kids or stay in Bedford. When my father left, we had to sell the house. He took the money with him for that. And, what was really just changed life transformative for me, because if my mother had gone to India, she would face the stigma, and we would face the stigma of being being the child of divorced parents. And I don't know if you know India very well, but there aren't divorced parents now. There were definitely not that many divorced people in 1975. And so she looked at this place, Bedford, Massachusetts, and thought, what could she do? So she decided to stay we happened to be able to move into Bedford Village. We were on welfare for a couple of years. I remember going to Purity Supreme, and I have a memory of my mother taking out the vouchers because we were on food stamps when everyone else was using money, and I asked, why is our money different? And she explained, because we have some troubles. And my most vivid memory, and I have many memories of the church, but my most vivid memory was when we moved into Bedford Village. It felt like dozens of people helping us move. Because again, and they were all from the church. They were all the faces I remembered from the church. And I feel like the welcome of that church that enveloped us in that particular moment when my mother had to move, take our belongings from her house and truck them over to an apartment in Bedford, and just people were putting things up on the walls and moving, and we had a lot more furniture, so it was jamming in there. It feels to me like a kind of metaphor for what this church has done for so many people. And I know that we would not have felt the comfort and strength to go on. I can say for my mother, she would not have felt the comfort and strength to do what she did if she didn't have this sense of community around her. And I will say, what I'm proudest of is that within a few years, my mother was able to get a job at Raytheon, first as a travel agent and then at Raytheon. And by the time I was 11, she bought a house here in Bedford. And she thought it was really important to live in this community because though, we were Indian immigrants in the early 70s, this community enveloped us and made it possible for me to honestly be who I am today. Thank you.
Thank you, Neera. We're going to be hearing lots more from Neera, but I particularly want kids to feel free to introduce yourselves to Neera after the service. And, she is somebody that is a role model for many, and I would like you to know her. And before we have kids and teachers go on to their classes, you got it. We've got a word from our sponsor, the Stewardship Committee and Friends. And here is the director, Doug Muter, and Dawn LaFrance Linden.
Hi, I'm Doug Muter, and today's Time for All Ages is brought to you by the Stewardship Committee. It's a skit called The Bag of Troubles. And of course, before we start, we're going to have a commercial. Stewardship Committee wants to remind you that this is the last Sunday of the Stewardship campaign, so get those pledge cards in. And Neera already told us about some of the advantages of belonging to a community like First Parish, and we're going to dramatize another one in this little skit. And so we asked for the help of three people who represent a few of the many social action projects that people at First Parish work on. We got Ron Cordes from the Partner Church Council, and Janet Powers from the Climate Justice Group, and Vito Lamura from the Sanctuary Committee. Our narrator is Dawn LaFrance Linden from the Stewardship Committee. Now, in addition to the speaking parts in the skit, which is these people, we're going to need some extras who come in and do something right at the very end. So I was wondering if some of the children would like to come up here and be our extras. And the narrator will tell you when you need to do something. So if anybody wants to come up and just gather over here.
Hello. Hello. Hello, hello. Testing 1, 2, 3. Is that on or is that just me?
Keep going.
Hello, hello. Hello. Yes? Excellent. Okay. I'm actually going to move you guys down just a little bit. Can I have you on the second stair here? And just have a seat. Thank you so much for helping us. Okay, scoot on over. Well, once upon a time, there was a bag of troubles. In the bag of troubles were all the problems of the world. And the bag of troubles was along a busy road. And most people walking down the road, they had heard of the bag of troubles, okay? And they avoided it. They didn't want anything to do. Didn't they have enough trouble of their own? So they would give it as wide a berth as they could and just hurry along. Some people would stub their toe or trip on the troubles, but then, recover themselves and keep going. However, there were other people who thought differently. They thought, well, aren't we of the world? If the troubles of the world aren't our troubles, whose are they? And so they thought maybe we can move the troubles of the world down the road. But they were going to find out that that wasn't necessarily so easy.
I don't see why I can't just pick this thing up and move it. Okay, that wasn't such a good idea.
Well, why don't I try to drag it then? Because I really want to make a difference. Oh, no. No, can't drag it.
Come on, you two. I'll show you how to do this. That didn't work either.
So our folks were a little discouraged. They figured out that they weren't going to be able to move the problems of the world on their own. But as they consulted with each other, one of them had an idea.
Maybe I can just move part of this. Ooh. Hey, look what I got. That's our sixth principle. The goal of world community with liberty and justice for all. I know what I'll do with this. I'm going to give it to the Partner Church Committee. This is what they do. They work with Unitarians around the world. I'll get them to help me move it.
Well, that looks interesting. What else is in here? It's kind of heavy, but I think I can manage this one. I think we need to do something about what's happening on our planet. And I think there's groups in here. Is there anybody out there who might want to help me with this one? Oh, lots of people. Okay, I'm going to give it to you. Whoa, got it? Okay, thanks.
Okay, let me take a look here. Aha! Here it is. Way too many immigrant families, just like my friend Maria's family, are being fractured by unjust deportation. It's too heavy for me to move all by myself. How many of you will help me move it down the road? All right, let's go.
And as other people saw what these three were doing, they decided, hey, maybe there's something that I can do to help move the troubles of the world down the road to a solution. Are there any troubles that you would like to help move towards a solution? Shout it out. Equal access to high-quality education. Anyone else? Single-payer medical care. Medical care for all. Anybody else? What do you have? To help feed the world. To help feed the world. Feed the hungry. Feed the hungry. In the back? Peace, justice, and reconciliation amongst all nations. Well, as you can see, our bag of troubles is getting smaller. And I bet our bag of troubles is getting lighter. We have one more? What do you have? Eloise? No? Do you guys, any of you guys want to? Do you guys have some? Okay. So our bag of troubles is now significantly reduced. So hopefully our next generation will be able to move our bag of troubles down the road towards a solution. So can I have my children, my next generation, can you push that bag of troubles down the road and off the chancel for me? Of course we can, she says. Of course we can. Woo!
Kids and teachers can leave for their classes now. Everybody else, get those pledge cards in.
And as they go down the road, we're going to sing Spirit of Life. If you do not know it, it's at number 123. This is the little poem, Stubborn Ounces by Bonaro Overstreet. You say the little efforts that I make will do no good. They never will prevail to tip the hovering scale where justice hangs in balance. I don't think I ever thought they would, but I am prejudiced beyond debate in favor of my right to choose which side shall feel the stubborn ounces of my weight. Our offering is an occasion to exercise our stubborn ounces. Freely we have received, freely give for the good work of this congregation within and far, far beyond these walls. Our offering will now gratefully be received. Massachusetts already has a singing state trooper. I think there's room for a singing selectman as well. When I went looking for those old photos of Neera and Bill, I also pulled out a copy of Neera's marriage license. She was married right here in this room, and I can't say this for all the weddings I've officiated, but she's actually still married to her husband of 19 years. On these licenses, there is a place for occupation, and Neera, 19 years ago, stated that her occupation was policy advisor. No doubt other brides and grooms have been policy advisors, but you are an official policy advisor. Bill may have more to say about this, but indeed, Neera has been chief domestic policy advisor to Hillary Clinton, to Barack Obama, and to many others. She is a policy advisor now, and it's not coincidental that she chose the words policy change in the title of her remarks today. I also officiated at Jack Mendelssohn's wedding to Judith. And, well, he did not put policy advisor on the license as his occupation, but he could have. Jack Mendelssohn was the preeminent representative of Unitarian Universalism in the second half of the 20th century. He ministered to churches in Indianapolis and in Rockford, Illinois, Arlington Street in Boston, First Church in Chicago, and here at the mighty First Parish in Bedford. Ministry, however, was really just a cover for Jack's real occupation, which was policy advisor. Jack was a policy advisor to Adlai Stevenson, to Bobby Kennedy, to Jesse Jackson, to Michael Dukakis. Over drinks at the rectory in Brighton, Jack even gave policy advice to Richard Cardinal Cushing. As one of the first Americans to meet with newly independent African heads of state in the 1960s, Jack was a policy advisor to the White House. He was the leading white male ally in struggles for racial and gender justice in our denomination. In every arena, always Jack was a vigorous activist agent and advisor for systemic policy change. And nothing got under Jack's skin more than if someone would reassuringly quote the Theodore Parker line, later picked up by Martin Luther King, that the arc of the universe is long, but you know, it bends toward justice. Jack might have said, hooey. That arc will never bend on its own, but it can and must be bent by human hands, yours and mine. Speaking of human hands, one of Jack's sermons in the 1980s was titled "A Heimlich Maneuver for America," in which he observed that the American democratic spirit had been obstructed by racism and greed and selfishness and militarism, that the spirit of democracy was choking to death, and that strong, swift remediation was needed to disgorge that which is stuck in the American craw. Enough thoughts and prayers. Now is the time for action. That is the kind of policy advice that Jack gave. With others today, Jack would be calling for a defibrillator to shock, restart, and reawaken the American heart. Now, some of you may have noticed that on the back of our order of service and on the masthead of our newsletter, it says that we at First Parish have an affiliate community minister, and his name is Bill Schultz. Yes, Bill was minister here when Neera was small. Bill also served 2 terms as president of the Unitarian Universalist Association. He then was president of Amnesty International USA and later the head of our UU Service Committee. Working with Neera, he also was a fellow at the Center for American Progress. You may nonetheless wonder, as our affiliate community minister, what has Bill Schulz done for us lately? What has Bill Schulz done for us lately? We are about to find out. To introduce Neera, please welcome another distinguished policy advisor, Bill Schulz. Earn your keep.
He's impossible. How has he lasted this long? How could I have known when I performed that child dedication for Neera in 1976, right here in this sanctuary, that she would grow up to become one of the United States' foremost public intellectuals? But even then, it was clear that she had a mind of her own. She took that child dedication flower from me, and she smelled it, she poked it. I think she may have pulled off a petal or two, but she had, unlike some children, the good sense not to eat it. And that, I think, provides an appropriate metaphor for who she is and has become. Curious, analytical, charming, tough, and sensible enough not to ingest all the crap that comes her way as president and CEO of the Center for American Progress, the country's preeminent progressive think tank. Neera is a graduate of UCLA and of Yale Law School. She has been a close advisor, as John said, for many years to Hillary Clinton, Director of Domestic Policy for the Obama-Biden presidential campaign, instrumental in designing and helping pass the Affordable Care Act, a very, very important part of her legacy. And now at CAP focuses on building grassroots opposition to the Trump agenda and developing an alternative agenda. And as John said, she also kindly shepherded me as a senior fellow for human rights at the center from 2006 to 2010, though I noticed that that is not included on your resume. And it all began here in Bedford, as Neera so touchingly just told you a few minutes ago. My wife, Beth, is also a Unitarian Universalist minister. She served the congregation in Huntington, New York, in which Mariah Carey grew up. Now, I'm guessing that Neera may not have quite Mariah's vocal range, though we've heard she's had fewer marriages, but knowing First Parish, I'm pretty certain that if we had to choose between having nurtured Neera or Mariah, we'd pick Neera any day. Neera Tanden.
Thank you so much. And I have to just start off by saying how really moving it is for me to be back here in this place, in this room. The last time I was here in this particular location, I was getting married. And John Gimmons married me and my husband, Ben Edwards. And I know when we reached out to him, I think he was a little quizzical since we'd been gone so long as to why we were coming back here. I'd lived in Washington for several years. I'd been away from Bedford for several years. But the reason why we wanted to get married here, even though we live very far away, was because this church, this sanctuary, this town, was why I am who I am, why I became the woman I became to marry the man I did. And both Ben and I understood that I would not have made it to UCLA or where I met my husband or Yale or the White House if it weren't for this community And that is why I'm so really honored to be back here. I touched on earlier of, some of the challenges I had when I was growing up and we had when we were growing up. And just to say, I think there's a long-running debate in our society about what matters more to people, the community or the individual. And I look back in my own experience, my growing up, my mother's experience, and I say wholeheartedly, she's one tough cookie, and believe me, she still is one tough cookie. And it took a lot of personal strength for her to make it through those challenging times for us. But she did not do it alone. She would be the first to say she did not do it alone. She did it with this community, with the people, friends and neighbors who didn't even know her very well and still came out to help her, and to me and my brother. But what's also so seminal about my experience and so critical to my experience was that my family was able to go from the brink of disaster, poverty, a whole series of challenges, to who I am today because of the actions of people who would never meet us, political leaders, some will call them faceless bureaucrats, who decided to create programs and ideas that would ensure to work towards the day that every child had a chance. And what do I mean by that? As I said, my father left when I was 5. He disappeared for a couple of years. We didn't really know what to do. My mother had to sell the house. We were lucky to be able to stay in Bedford by moving into Bedford Village. But why were we able to move into Bedford Village? Because my mother was able to get Section 8 housing, a voucher to live in housing in Bedford. So my mother was able to move from that kind of deep chasm where she's losing her house into an apartment in Bedford. And why that was so important is this community was different. The schools here are fantastic. This community invests in the schools. I was able to get a good public education. And yet we had challenges affording things, so we were on welfare. And I remember so vividly going to the welfare line with my mother and being in line, and there were long lines, I will say, and I asked my mother several times, when are we leaving? When will we be done? And she'd say, 1 more minute. And I remember looking at her and saying, you said 1 more minute an hour ago. And she turned to me and said, I'm doing the best I can. But I remember so vividly thinking, man, we are in some tough straits here. When you're 5 or 6 and you go from a big house to an apartment, it's not really clear to you what's happening, but it became clearer and clearer to me. And I remember I went to Davis School, then Page School, and I was the only kid in that line who was using back then they had a 10-cent voucher for lunch. And I went home and said to my mom, I'm the only one using the funny money. and she said, yeah, we're having a tough time. But it was really interesting. No one in those schools ever made fun of me for being the one using those vouchers. And as I said, after a couple of years, the system worked. My mother was able to rely on the social safety net and then get a job as a travel agent and then eventually get a job at Raytheon. And within several years, we bought a house, 178 Springs Road, which she lived in until 5 years ago, and now she lives in Washington. And so my story, honestly, is what I work towards every day, which is to ensure every kid in the country who faces troubles like that has something there so they're not just left behind. And in the intervening decades since the 1970s, we've been fighting a battle of who this country is. Attacks on the government and saying it's doing too much for people. And We do too much, not too little. And I've been used to those fights. I'll just be 100% candid. I've been used to going on TV and arguing about why more education funding matters, or why we need to cover people, and why it's a moral obligation that everyone have health care in our country. But I have to say, this last year has been incredibly different. We're not even having policy debates. I mean, we are, sort of, but we're not really having policy debates. Fundamentally, the debates we are having now, and all the Twitter fights and all the battles and the attacks, is who is America? Who are Americans? Who is America for? Whether it's for everyone or just groups that look a certain way. Whether it's going to be open to people who are different or closed. Whether the future for us is kind of a warfare where we pit groups against each other, or whether we can actually return to a politics and community of seeing each other as neighbors and friends. I think this is the most consequential moment of my life. I think this is the most consequential moment for the American people in decades. I truly believe the battles we're having and the fights we're having are as important as the civil rights struggles of the 60s. Because the future depends on how this moment is answered. It is stark. And I will say, I don't know how it feels not to be in Washington, because I'm in Washington every day, but I can tell you it's hard. The hardest thing we all grapple with is a world in which it's not that there's terrible news once a week. There's terrible news 5 times before 8 a.m., and it's because the president is tweeting. And it's hard. It's hard to feel always in battle and not become essentially a general in a war. This, I think, is the deepest challenge all of us face, which is groups are being attacked. People are being attacked. We have to defend. But if we build a politics which is just war against war, battle against battle, soldier against soldier, that is going to hurt the country for the long haul. Don't get me wrong, we have to win. We have to take political power back to protect the people we all care about. So this church doesn't have to be a sanctuary for an undocumented immigrant family. That's the gravity of the politics we're in. But let me also express what I'm optimistic about. In fact, what gives me my own personal strength to go on. When Donald Trump got elected, I have to say our national security team, with which Bill was associated, we looked at what happens in other countries when right-wing nationalist populists take power. And usually the opposition goes away, becomes tired, beleaguered, and weak. And then the demagogue grows in power and attacks the institutions, judiciary, free press. A classic example of this is Orban in Hungary, who is stronger today, several years in power, than he was when he took power. But what I'm most optimistic about in the United States is that has not happened. There is growing energy in the country. There are people marching all over. In the last year, I've been in Washington 20 years. In the last year, there's been more political marching of such a size and energy than in my entire time combined. 3 marches of millions of people across this country. So in that most fatal question right now, who is America and what kind of politics we will have, people all throughout the country are answering. They are answering not just in the issues they care about. women's equality, health care, gun safety, protecting our weakest, ensuring immigration is fair, comprehensive immigration reform, dreamers. They are changing the way we do politics. They are engaging in protest. They are engaging in town halls. They are flooding the zone. In fact, I can say from Washington, members of Congress have stopped doing town halls because they don't want to see people in their faces. It's ridiculous, right? Ridiculous. Like, that doesn't answer the mail. You just have don't have the town hall, you still have the problems. But that's what's important. Some of the work we've done at CAP over the last year is to try to channel the energy of resistance into the policy battles. And policy battles on healthcare and taxes. And I can say with 100% confidence, 20 million people would not have healthcare today if it were not for the resistance actions of people throughout this country. Republicans, or a few Republicans who didn't vote for that bill, but they didn't vote for that bill, not because of concerns of their elites and friends, but ultimately because the opposition in the country was so fierce. More people made phone calls against to protect the ACA and against the healthcare bill, the Republican healthcare bill, than in 1 month period than the entire last 2 years of 2015 and 2016. People mobilized in town halls, not people who were going to lose their health care, although there were some of them, but millions of people who had health care who didn't want their neighbors to lose it. People organized and called members of Congress, and you know, it's annoying to call members of Congress. It's lonely, you keep calling, they take their note, they move on, but people did it day after day. And they did it because they were fighting for a kind of country we all believe in, which is a country that does not take away health care from people, but expands it and gives it to every single person. So I think of this moment, and I hope and work for this moment to be an inflection point for the country, where we take this resistance and use it to rebuild and reclaim the kind of country we want to be. I'm so heartened that the resistance is fueled by women. 84% of the new activists are women. A lot of them are mothers. They are fueling every single march. They are the backbone of political organizing, of policy organizing, of protest movements. And if these people stay in politics, not just now, not just for 2018 and 2020, but for the future, they can reshape this country around beliefs that I think we all thought we had until the psychological, deeply wounding 2016 election, which is a country that ensures that every single person has health care, a country that ensures that every child has the opportunities that I had to live their best life, a world in which inequality is not stifling everything we do, that every single person can have real and true dignity and equality. And I know it looks like that is very far away right now, but what's interesting about how things move in politics and how things change and transform in these moments is that this could be an inflection point, and I hope it is an inflection point that builds a chain reaction. I lived in California in 1992. So I went to UCLA. I graduated Bedford High School, went to UCLA, and worked on the Clinton-Gore campaign in 92, and then I was out there for the summer of 94 and saw the governor's election in 1994, and it was shocking, just to paint the picture of what was happening. California was, not as diverse then as it is now, but one of our most diverse states. I went from Bedford, Massachusetts to UCLA, which was about 45% students of color back then. Much larger. UCLA is a much bigger place that I was used to. And politics were rolling along racial lines. So there was a governor's race in 1994 where the Republican incumbent was facing really big challenges and started running anti-immigrant ads. He has showed pictures of Mexicans crossing the border. He made the whole issue of immigration a big issue. There was a big proposition. They were pushing bills in the assembly that teachers would have to report undocumented students to their communities. There was a whole wave of politics, much like we saw in 2016. But that politics, that hatred, before that, Latinos in California were voting, 50% Democrats, Republicans. That horrible race inflected politics for a generation to come, moved people away from that abhorrent politics. But the sad lesson is Pete Wilson did win that year, just like Trump won in 2016. But from that moment, people formed coalitions they never did. Other people recognized they weren't engaged in politics in a way they should, that the California they knew was at stake. And this has to be a similar moment for our country. I absolutely believe it will be, but it will take all of us. All of us engaging in politics and engaging in policy and protesting and fighting, but also I think this is almost like a virus, the kind of politics as a battlefield where we pit people against each other. And I see it amongst my progressive brothers and sisters all the time, which is they feel attacked and they attack back harder. And it's hard not to. But I think as we move past these battles, we have to recognize that we have common cause with everybody in this country. And that it is exactly what the demagogues of hate want, which is us to be permanently divided against people who are different than us. That will make America not America, if that's what our politics is for the future. I am so, again, honored to be here because people like Bill Schultz were so just a rock for my family. And, Bedford is it's not the most diverse place to grow up in the 1970s. There's not a lot of Indian immigrants coming in the 1970s. I think we were, one of a handful of families of color when we were here. Really just a handful. But this community never saw that. If they did, they recognized they had a bigger burden to help. Bill Schultz was a fantastic rock for my family, for my mother. She sends her regards. And my mother has, I will say, and John knows this, has had struggles. She had struggles even past the early 70s. And John was a great spiritual advisor in those periods. And so I'm really grateful for that. I honestly believe that the spirit and idea of this town and community, which I felt, which is to have, help people when they need it. The policy and ideas and programs that actually allowed us to bounce back. A lot of hard work, but bounce back from a crisis in our family. All of these things are at stake. And what I'm optimistic about is that we won't just get back what we lost, but we will truly, through this moment of pain for the country, bring a new level of activism and engagement to change the country, to live up to the ideals that permeate this town, this church, and actually the founding of our country, which is to be there for everyone and create true equality and true dignity for every single person. Thank you.
So you're already on your feet. Stay on your feet. And during community hour, get your coffee or whatever and come back in here and we'll have a half hour of conversation with Neera from 11:30 until 12. And now let's sing Spirit of Life. It's number 123. Call it 121. It's somewhere in there. In unison, let's say our closing words. Go out into the world in peace, have courage, hold on to what is good, return to no person evil for evil, strengthen the faint-hearted, support the weak, help the suffering, honor all beings. Salgan al mundo en paz, tengan valor, aférense a lo que es bueno, no devuelvan mal por mal, fortalezcan a los temerosos, apoyen a los débiles, ayuden a los que sufren, honren a todos los seres. May it be so.